pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. Adoption of the agenda. Are there any proposed changes?
Just remind you, Mr. Chairman, that you have an amended agenda that added the 2 Finance Committee items from yesterday.
Yes, I think we all have that one. Us, thank you. All right. Entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as presented or as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, no. We'll adopt the agenda. Citizen comments. Did anyone sign up? No, sir. All right, thank you. Consent agenda. How would the board like to handle that one?
Motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Okay, motion to approve is presented. Is there a second? Second. A second, any discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, no.
Mr.
Consent-
Chairman, I apologize. You need a roll call for the consent because there were some refund
There was
requests on there.
refund, yes, thank you. All right, so because there were refunds within the consent agenda, we need to roll call that consent agenda adoption. Supervisor McCarthy?
Aye.
Supervisor Slaughter?
Aye.
Supervisor Wells? Aye. Supervisor Loughlin?
Aye.
Supervisor Dunn? Aye. Supervisor Trout?
Aye.
Chair votes aye and the motion carries. That will bring us then to committee appointments. Extension Leadership, Creek.
I have someone. I have not heard of their willingness to commit right yet. I am still working on it.
Thank you, sir. Shawnee Land Sanitary District.
Yes, sir. As has been discussed about the propriety of making it elected or appointed, the Public Works Committee decided that appointment was still the method that we should use. And we do have someone who has submitted an application. I have asked one of the members who currently serves, whose tenure is ending, if they would serve on another committee because they do put a lot of activity into that appointment. So with that being said, I would move to nominate Mr. Jeff Stevens, who is eligible for reappointment to the Shawnee Land Sanitary District Advisory Committee. Should I do them both at one time or separately?
That would be your choice.
Let me just go ahead then and say I would also like to nominate Mr. Jimmy Smith for appointment to the Shawnee Land Sanitary District Advisory Committee. Those 2 gentlemen, I think, will make continue the work of the committee for the betterment of the community.
All right, you've heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Dunn.
to those of you on the Public Works Committee, I would just encourage you to rethink your position on elections. I just think that you ought to have an election. I think it is the best way to get representation out. And if you come up with that consideration again, I'd appreciate the opportunity to address you.
Thank you, sir. Further discussion? Anyone? All right, you've heard the motion and second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, no.
Nay.
Mr.
Dunn.
No. Mr. Smith and Mr. Stevens are appointed. Board of Equalization, we're still seeking someone to serve. It's not a very glamorous position, but it's a very, very important one. It is the point of question on reassessments. So we
Mr. Chairman.
appreciate someone stepping forward. Yes?
I've been talking to a couple of people to possibly serve in this position, and the main issue has been the time of when the board meets, that they are unable to commit. So I don't know if that's a possibility of moving the times around, or if it's only 1 day a week or 1 day every other week. But I think the way that it's written on the description, that it looks like it's 5 days a week from 8 to 12, I think, or something like that, which for many people is just not a reasonable time that they can volunteer.
It is a short time frame, and in order to try to allow time to get everyone in that would like to, it is a pretty compressed period of time and a pretty heavy duty for short duration.
I just think that's the hurdle that.
We can
many-
look at that, and Mr. Tibbs, if you'll help me remember that, I'd appreciate that, sir. All right. That'll bring us to Frederick Board. Supervisor Slaughter?
Motion to reappoint Mr. Gary Oates.
Second.
And the second, is there discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, no. Mr. Oates is reappointed. I'm sure his board will appreciate that. All right, Human Resources Committee report.
Give me a second, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir?
It's on consent.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes,
before
sir.
Supervisor Dunn starts, I would request his indulgence that we deal with these different items out of sequence. I was wondering if we could deal with number 3 prior to number 2, if Mr. Dunn is amenable to that.
That's fine.
Does anyone else object? All right, we'll deal with item number 3 first.
No, Mr. Chairman, so there are 4 items that have to come before the board. And the first one is a purchasing manager. The board approved that position, made a recommendation of that position, and I'd appreciate the board's support for that.
Wait a minute. Again,
The committee, the HR committee,
HR Committee, got it, okay.
had
Go ahead.
approved a purchasing manager at a grade 10. The committee unanimously recommended approval of that, and I would so move.
Okay, we just agreed to consider item number 3.
I'm sorry, my request was to go from 1 to 3 and back to 2. I'm
Got it.
sorry, did not clarify that?
You've heard the motion. The motion was to recommend approval of the purchasing manager.
Second.
Second.
There is a second.
I'm sorry?
Second.
Second. Discussion now. Is there any?
Mr. Chairman, just clarification for anybody that may be wondering, this approval does not approve funding of the position, it just creates sort of a placeholder for
It
the position?
authorizes the position when it can be funded. Yes. Well clear? Okay. All right. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right. And then we'll go to number 3.
Mr. Chairman, in the conversation, I'd like to do number 4. Number 4 simply is the Fire and Rescue Department is requesting approval for change to the Career Development Program. The committee also had unanimously approved that, and this is just to put that Career Development Program into the same mode as everything else.
In the same kitty.
Yes.
Yes.
Second.
And the second, discussion? All those in favor, aye.
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 Opposed, no. All right.
Now, Mr. Chairman,
Thank you, sir.
the Fire and Rescue Department is requesting a reclassification of the range of a battalion chief from range 9 to range 10, and a deputy chief from range 10 to 11. The committee recommended approval, and I would so move.
Heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
And a second. Now discussion. Supervisor Lofton.
I do have one, a question, at least one question I'd like to ask. In the justification for this reclassification, I'm wondering, does that based upon their increase in responsibility and duties and authority?
That is part of it, sir, yes, sir. The other part is based on the original career development. Every rank within that had a range classification assigned to it. If you look at the range schedule for the HR department, from the lowest range to the highest range, there's a pretty wide spread for all of them. But for all of our promotions, from firefighter through technician and higher to the supervisory positions, the max that any one person can get is 10%. That's based on the program that we have set for many, many years. But our concern is if we try to put 2 ranks in the same range schedule, you get someone that's been here for 10, 15 years, they get a promotion, they're going to top out. And without being able to justify how to move around that. Most places, and I don't know of any other thing in the HR department that's got 2 different ranks in the same range classification.
So if I may continue with that then, So the report that we had done several years ago that adjusted salary classifications and salary ranges, was this included in that report?
Parts of it, but one of the errors that we found was at some point, captain and battalion chief got sideswiped or sidestepped, and they were actually out of the document. How, I don't know. We don't know. That's water under the bridge.
We didn't catch that then.
Correct.
But we've been operating under that since the report came out and we adopted it and the salary ranges and the classifications.
But we haven't had anything. We just got a battalion chief 2 years ago, and we have no current captains. So for our career development, that's where the ranges really come into play.
Maybe if, I don't know that you can answer this, maybe Mr. Marciano could answer this. How does that fit into the context of all the positions within the county? Do we think that we should be picking out particular positions that we need to upgrade as opposed to all of them? What was the rationale behind just doing these two beyond what was said here? Did we look at if we've missed this, if we've misjudged this? Have we misjudged others? Have we missed others? Or is it just solely focused on this?
If you'd like to, please come forward. I apologize, but those folks that are watching in can't participate if we don't come forward. Thank you, Mike.
No problem. Currently, it was just focused on the fire and rescue request in terms of specifically their needs and what was articulated. We looked then at other jurisdictions and what they are doing to make certain that the ranges slotted for each of the positions were appropriate. And I felt that they were based on the information presented to me. But a look beyond fire and rescue for other comparable positions in terms of ranges for other positions in other departments, I did not do that, sir.
Let me follow up then. Within the fire and rescue department, did you look at the salary, the job descriptions, the classifications, and all that?
I did, and I looked at the old job description, and then for all the positions from the chief on down, and looked at each of them and felt like that alongside the career development plan in terms of what certain benchmarks they needed to meet before they could be considered for promotion. I felt like there was appropriate distinction between each.
So we haven't added any duties, we haven't added any responsibilities, we haven't added any authority to these job descriptions. We just now think that they need to be a higher pay grade. Is that an assumption I should not make?
May I interrupt you?
Sure.
I believe in the committee, as Mr. Oliver had said, they were correcting a mistake, that we had a certain range, and one of the ranges had been left out. And so this was just to put a structure together, so you have chief, assistant chief, deputy chiefs, et cetera, coming down the line. And when this was done a few years ago, before I was on the board, that had been not addressed. So they're trying to address or adjust for a previous situation.
Omission, really, is
Yeah,
what it
omission.
was.
So we're saying that the deputy chief's position was not a part of the report that we got several years ago? It was not included in that report?
Larry?
I don't remember off the top of my head without looking at that up, Mr. Lofton. Our pure focus on this was to get career development back in line with what it's supposed to be in line with, and that every rank within career development has a range that equals to the salary administration program that HR does and finance does. That's where we're at. At this point, there is certainly no thought about trying to give raises or anything like that. We certainly have some compression issues, but that's not what this is addressing. This is addressing to make sure that if the assistant chief gets approved, they'll be at a range 12, the deputy chief's going to be at a range 11, the battalion chief will be at a range 10, a captain will be at a range 9. So there is disparity between each of those ranks.
So you're saying that this was actually initiated, predicated upon an assistant chief?
No, not initially, no. Initially was to try to get career development back in line with what it originally started out with.
So in the years ensuing from that report, we're saying that we did not realize that these pay grades for these classifications were deficient. Is that what we're saying?
I think they brought this, I think this was actually brought forward last year or the year before, and it didn't get acted on at HR. All it's trying to do is create a hierarchy so that the salary ranges are commensurate with the level of responsibility of these positions. That's all it's doing. You know, I can't sit here, I don't think any of us can tell you how exactly we ended up here. As you point out, a number of years ago, we did a salary survey. It's been at least 6 years, I would say. We could go back and take a look at that for curiosity, if no other reason, to see. I don't even know if the captain position was in there at that time, honestly, I don't know. But there's no ulterior motives here. This is simply trying to, the career development program within the Fire and Rescue Department has benchmarks, training, et cetera, that as an individual meets those criteria, they become eligible for consideration for a promotion. So there's an effort to try and separate out, as those responsibilities increase, that the range that those positions they would be promoted to would be steps up as well. Right now, you have 2 of those positions that are within the same range. So it doesn't really make much sense to anybody, I don't think, as it's structured right now.
But we're saying, I don't, when you talk about saying they're in the same range, but I'm looking here and it says from range 9 to range 10, and from range 10 to range 11. So that tells me that the 2 positions were not in the same pay range. Am I mistaken?
If you turn, I assume the materials you have in front of you would have the memorandum from Chief Lindenberg. He outlines the ranges, and for captain, the current ranges right now on our salary administration program has a captain as a 9. Okay, or it doesn't list a captain, I should say, to be clear. Has battalion chief
Both of them.
as a 9, has a deputy chief at a 10, okay, and it currently doesn't have the assistant chief. What we are proposing is to make the captain would, excuse me, I keep starting with captain. The captain would be added back in there to create the career development that we seek. The captain would be a 9. The battalion chief, which is currently a 9, would become a 10. The deputy chief, which is currently a 10, would become an 11. And creating those stair steps so as they achieve each of the benchmarks in the career development plan, justifying their consideration for promotion to the next position, then we have a salary structure that conforms with that as well.
So now we're saying that the captain's position was missing.
Several years ago, 2006, 2007, they changed the salary administration program. We had not had a position, we had not had an individual in a battalion chief's position for probably 8 years, because they rearranged, and Chief DeBruller, when he was here, he had created the rank of deputy chief. Unbeknownst to any of us, as we don't typically keep up with a salary administration program for our purposes, all of a sudden we have a period of time where the rank of battalion chief was taken off the salary administration program. So when the peer review group got together for fire and rescue to rewrite career development, because the bulk of that was because the program was 20-plus years old and some of the educational components were outdated and no longer available, we caught that in 2014 and said, this is not correct. We went through HR to try to figure out if it was an error on their part, our part, whoever. We finally found where it was listed, and it was known that somebody made an error. So we tried to put career development back in the process so that there was an escalating scale for the various ranks to make sure that we can cover those salaries for that, for people that with tenure or somebody new coming in. That's all this was. Now, whether it was caught during that salary study, I don't remember that, sir.
So we're saying that a captain's pay grade is 9 now,
Correct.
and the battalion chief's pay grade is 9 now.
In the current salary administration program, yes, sir.
And based upon your review of the job description with responsibilities, duties, and authority, that you, the HR department, believes that battalion chief should be a range 10 instead of 9?
Yes, sir. That coupled with the career development requirements that we also have adopted, or at least asked the board to adopt, because there's clearly a very structured approach and sign-offs and checks and balances, if you will, before anyone is considered to go to the next level.
But we do have a very clear, concise job description for captain, battalion chief, deputy chief.
We do, sir.
And no overlap in those duties, responsibilities, or authority.
Not that I mean, there may be potentially some just because other duties is assigned, but nothing specifically that jumps to my mind.
The overlap's always going to be instant responsibilities. Being responsible for making decisions on instant scenes, managing those resources and stuff, that's the overlap. As far as administratively, each of them have very distinct responsibilities. The deputy chiefs are responsible for divisions. So a deputy chief is in charge of the training division, which is responsible for making sure that everybody in the county gets educated, career and volunteer. There's a deputy chief in charge of the life safety division, fire marshal's office. They have a set responsibilities that go with that. There's a deputy chief in charge of operations to try to oversee the 3 battalion chiefs and the people in the fire and rescue stations. So those job descriptions are very set and specific to that.
And your employees in those positions have been operating under those job descriptions?
Correct.
Correct. We did not change those, sir.
You did not change the job descriptions or duties, responsibilities, or authority of either one?
Correct.
You just feel that now there's an overlap that needs to be done away with?
Sir.
Because of an omission.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor McCarthy.
Mr. Chairman, I was, I believe, the lone committee member at HR who voted against this proposal. And the reason is I see this as an academic exercise to create a nice, neat chart. But the reality is that the reason it's being asked for is there's a perceived conflict between a captain's pay and a battalion chief's pay, and it's unfair to have them in the same pay range. We have no captains. We don't have any intention, from what I've seen so far in our budget, of having any captains in the near future. It's such time that we actually have a conflict or potential conflict, then I think it's worth looking at. But all this really has, in reality, is we're taking an academic exercise that will end up giving someone who has a particular salary today a raise tomorrow, and they didn't have to increase their responsibilities, their duties, hit additional pay raises. I just see it as another expense that extends the range for this particular job from where it is now to an additional $30,000 in potential pay. In the private sector, you hire somebody and you say, would you do a job for a particular salary, yes or no? And they agree to do that. We don't say, oh, well, the guy down the street is making $30,000 more than me, you should be paying me $30,000. It's kind of like the old parable of the vineyard. You know, you made an agreement to work for this. Unless we have an actual conflict to deal with, where you have people within the organization where it's unfair to be paying them the same, I don't understand why you have to necessarily move them up to a particular pay range just because we happen to be a government that wants to have a nice, clean, chart. That's my 2 cents on that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I understand Supervisor McCarthy's position, but what I want to be clear on is any individual that's in one of these positions as a result of this action is not going to get a pay increase.
Right.
It would move the threshold of which the potential ultimate earnings of that individual, it gives them a higher ceiling that they may one day rise to, but nothing here is proposing to give anybody a pay increase. And while at the current state and time, we don't have an issue, someday we will. And we've recognized, we've identified that we've got a hierarchy in responsibilities. And we don't have a commensurate hierarchy in salaries. So if I'm going to require greater responsibility of this individual, it just makes sense to the HR committee that they would be at a higher pay range. That's all we're trying to do, is differentiate commensurate pay with responsibility. We're not proposing to give anybody a pay increase as a result of this. It is, as Mr. McCarthy said, sort of an academic exercise to try and get our structure in an appropriate form. That's what we're trying to do.
Mr. Chairman, as a point of
Go
clarification,
ahead.
by setting these levels, if tomorrow we decide we want to hire a new battalion chief, that new battalion chief will start at the lower level of that, which would be potentially $30,000 range higher than the lower end of the current structure. So we are locking ourselves into paying someone more tomorrow, $30,000 potentially more tomorrow than today. And that's the only concern I have, is that we are locking ourselves into a higher structure. So while we don't contemplate a raise, if we have a battalion chief that's today at the lower end of that range, if we pass this tomorrow, they may automatically have to be in the lower end of the upper range. So there is potential for a raise. It may not be a perceived raise, but it is a de facto real raise.
The entry salary for the one position is higher than the entry salary for the other. There's no debating that.
So you're saying the entry-level salary is different for a battalion chief than a deputy chief? Is that, did I just?
Well, as proposed, yeah.
It's the range.
Right, I understand what you're talking about. I've dealt with this a long time. But what I wanted to make sure of was that we weren't raising a salary range for a position because somebody's at the top and we want to give them a
No, sir.
raise.
No, sir.
Well,
That
we
is
want to
not-
make sure they get future raises. I want to make sure that this reclassification and the salary range adjustment is based upon responsibilities, authority, and duties as clarified in the job description.
Yes, sir.
That is correct.
And that has been taken into consideration with the knowledge of a potential assistant chief. Are you not going to come back next year and say, well, the assistant chief, we found that pay grade was the same grade as a deputy chief, and so we need to move that higher?
No, part of our analysis to make certain that our request for a higher range also looked at what other jurisdictions, not just Loudoun County, but beyond, Harrisonburg, Albemarle, Spotsylvania, all around the Commonwealth, to make certain that the ranges we're suggesting for each of these positions were appropriate, and including the assistant chief, and I think we're fine.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? The motion and the second is to adopt, which is again, just a correction to the hierarchy. Any further discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No?
2 noes. Is that Supervisor McCarthy and Supervisor Lofton? Thank you, the motion carries. Fire and Rescue Department requests a new position.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Dunn.
so the last item here for the HR committee is the Fire and Rescue Department is requesting a new position for Assistant Chief at a range of 12. The committee had recommended approval, and I would so move.
Heard the motion, is there a second?
Second.
The second, discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Lofton.
One of the reasons I asked for these to be taken out of sequence is I wanted to know that the battalion chiefs and the deputy chiefs had a clear, defined job description. Because I balk at adding another layer of administration. We're saying by this, from what I've heard, that an assistant chief will have duties, responsibilities, and authority that are not now covered. Would that be a
Partially.
assumption?
Partially, or the duties that they should be taking on is now being handled by someone to take away from their existing duties. So the example I will use in the department every day is we currently have a chief and 3 deputy chiefs. All the deputy chiefs have responsibilities respective to their divisions, which means they're busy every day. So depending on what issue comes forward, i.e. complaints, i.e. citizen concerns, i.e. An incident response that has problems associated with it, then between 2 of us in the office, someone's got to drop one item to pick up that item. Now, I understand that's common practice across the country and everything else. But every day for what we do, and especially over the last 6 months, it's a juggling act for administration because everything has gotten more demanding, documentation-wise, roles and responsibilities-wise, the different people that is moving in and the different generations are taking more time because of needs and entitlement and everything else. So we're juggling which is priority to try to meet those needs. Every day between 3 of us that's in the office, we put one thing on the item to be removed because we accomplished something, and there's 4 more that goes on the bottom of the page. So an assistant chief, if you look at chief's duties, that's a high-level government official that is dealing with other county departments, other political needs, all the other things that are associated with marketing the department as a whole to both the community and across the Commonwealth. So in order to do that, he has to have a number of people underneath of him or her to accomplish the other task. And those tasks are really starting to create havoc with trying to get stuff done on a regular basis and accomplish the things that the Board of Supervisors have asked us, county administration has asked us, the volunteer fire and rescue system has asked us, our employees have asked us. There's just not enough hours in the day.
So let me, if I may, Mr. Chairman, kind of recap what I've heard. From the previous discussion, we know that each job classification is clearly defined. So you're telling me that even though those classifications are clearly defined, the workload for each classification outstrips the time commitment that can be made by the person responsible to respond to that problem. Is that a fair assessment?
More so now than ever. Yes, sir.
So we're saying in order to respond to one of the 3 different areas where we have deputy chiefs, I need another layer of administration to kind of touch any of the 3. And I guess my thought process is if we have an idea, can it be done at a lower level? Could I hire an administrative assistant? Could I hire some type of position that generally, you may have a lot of them, but generally, my guess is the problems are going to fall in certain categories. I think I've heard you say that. So if we know basically what most of those categories are, we could train someone in the overall picture, but also specifically to deal with the Board of Supervisors request, complaints from the citizens, things like that. It seems to me that this layer of bureaucracy that we're trying to put in here is kind of an overreaction to a work overload that should be taking place down here, but now we want to add a position here at a higher level. So that's my problem with this.
So every division has an administrative assistant. All of them have their own job descriptions as well. They have tasks assigned to them that most of the deputy chiefs, other than oversight, never see, because that's their role and responsibility. For a lot of things that we deal with, the individual has to have authority to go along with the responsibility. We're one of the few departments in the county that doesn't truly have an assistant director or an assistant chief. So in the event that the fire chief is outside for whatever reason, vacation, medical leave, like Chief Lindenberg's on now, to truly delineate somebody to take that responsibility and deal with all those other factions, that is where we're going. We need someone that has authority above the deputies, because the deputy chiefs have enough responsibilities going through to get through on a daily basis. We need someone else to take the authority and move on with some projects, and in the absence of the fire chief, to make those recommendations. Administrative assistants and those type people are just not going to have that authority level to do that.
So you're saying that there are numerous problems that fall above a pay grade of a deputy chief that can't be handled with the authority that's needed?
Some days, yes, sir.
So we have all these problems rising to the top. And
I
the
won't say
job
all
descriptions,
problems, but there is
the job
problems.
descriptions I just heard about don't address those particular problems. They all have to rise to the top, to the chief.
No, there's plenty of problems that the deputy chiefs handle every day. But
I
there's,
understand that, but what I'm hearing you say is that there are problems, many problems that arise that are above the pay grade, so to speak, of the deputy chiefs, which leads me to believe that maybe somebody's job description isn't correct, because there should be very few things that rise to the level of the chief.
Mr. Chairman, if I could,
You may.
I think a big part of what we're seeking is someone with the knowledge, skills, ability, and authority to assist with some of the tasks that right now we all realize need to be undertaken, but there's not enough time for our chief to deal with. The chief is stretched so thin dealing with other issues that to deal with implementing some of the new changes that we all want to see is taking a back seat because of other day-to-day pressing issues that need to be addressed. That's what we're shooting for.
I look at it even slightly differently, and that is that we need to unload some of the day-to-day things that the chief is having to deal with because there's no one else at the door at the moment, so that he can concentrate on the very high-end stuff that we expect of him, or delineate it. So,
Well,
go ahead.
that's my concern, that we just talked about job descriptions and being written so that they have the responsibility and authority to act. So what I'm hearing you say is, we have a level of problems that only the chief can deal with, and we haven't tried to delegate that down to deputy chiefs. Now we have to add another layer of administration to deal with it. It seems like a federal government type of problem solving. I'm sorry.
Okay. Further discussion, anyone? Are we ready?
Is there any interest at all in recommitting this to HR to address some of the concerns?
Did HR work hard at it? Did they do it conscientiously?
Yes.
Do you feel they did their job?
Yes.
Then why would you send it back to them would be my question. I'm not being negative here. I'm confident they did what we asked.
And the reason I'm asking is Mr. Lofton's raised a number of issues, so I'm just asking 6 other board members, just their thoughts, that's all.
Are we ready? Okay. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
Hear one no. Motion carries. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, sir. Bring us to Finance Committee.
Yes, sir, Mr.
Supervisor
Chairman. The Finance Committee met actually yesterday. A couple of the items that were on our agenda were time sensitive, and so therefore you only have part of our agenda that we dealt with yesterday. The first item was the sheriff requesting authorization to apply for a school resource officer grant through DCJS. The grant application is for an SRO in fiscal year 2020. The grant application is due by March the 8th, and we would not have time to meet again before we would consider it. If the grant were to be awarded, the amount required would be $122,930, of which $80,216 would be local funds. Some of those funds could be in kind. For instance, if we provided a automobile for the SRO. The committee recommended approval, and I would so move.
Heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Lofton.
if I may, this is another one of those grants that lull you in with free money the first year, and then after that, it just goes away, and so it's all the county, and I do believe there is a more effective, efficient way to conduct the service that we're trying to provide here, and I am working on that now.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor?
I think it's important that we start looking at putting sheriff's deputies in the schools. I don't think there's any better department within our government in order to oversee the school safety. I'd rather have someone who's trained to the level of a deputy than a contractor or an untrained person in the schools, even if it means saving a few $1,000s here or there. I think the level of expertise from a sheriff's deputy is well worth the extra money. And considering that we're looking at providing SROs to the county school system as it is, I think it would be foolhardy not to take advantage of a grant that would help offset some of the costs that we're already anticipating in our current budget discussions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion, anyone? We ready? Supervisor Trout.
Aye.
Supervisor Dunn.
Aye.
Supervisor Lofton.
No.
Supervisor Wells.
Aye.
Supervisor Slaughter.
Aye.
Supervisor McCarthy.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, and the motion carries.
Okay, that'll take us to item number 2, Amendment Frederick County Code, Chapter 155, Taxation, Article 3, Senior Citizens and Disabled Persons Exemption and Deferral, to adjust amounts to account for inflation since the last amounts were established. The item has been approved and forwarded from the Code and Ordinance Committee. A public hearing would be required. The committee recommends approval, and I would so move.
Heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, is there discussion?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I would like to just interject that in 2017, the Finance Committee was charged with the task of review of this particular amendment. The Finance Committee spent numerous months of consideration and provided information was provided from our Commissioner of Revenue and also our Treasurer with regard to the impacts of this. It was decided by our committee before our budget was advertised and also before Mrs. Murphy could move this forward in March of 2018, which would have impacted our fiscal year budget of 2018. So I am not in favor of changing the current brackets that we have set forth with the current amendment, because I really felt like our committee had dug in and done the work and really were set with the amounts that we have. So I would not be in favor of moving it forward.
Thank you. Further discussion, anyone?
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Dunn.
So I was the person that tried to address this issue. My concern was that in 2003, or prior to that, there's been no adjustment. And I sent you all an email earlier. So before 2003, the range for tax exemption was between $0 and $20,000. In August of 2003, the Board of Supervisors went and modified that range from zero to $50,000, and they changed the items from a 160, 35, and 10% reduction. At the Code and Ordinance Committee, we had a discussion on this, and Ellen Murphy made the comment, who's Commissioner of Revenue, that those in the lower end could use some help. My intent was to try to address the inflation issue of those that are really tight for money. So that went from 20 to 25,000. After that meeting, there was also discussion on deferral. And I was not aware of that at the time, where you can go and defer taxes for those homeowners. And I believe it would be for, if it were husband and wife, for both parties. So if a husband died, wife is still there, and when she dies or leaves the house, at that point in time, it would go on, the house would go up for sale, and the taxes would be paid upon the sale of that house. The remainder would go to the estate. I think those are good comments. And so for that reason, if this goes forward on a public hearing, I'm likely to go and support the lower reduction from 0 to 25 instead of 20. And I'm also looking to go and decrease the amount between 35 and 50 and decrease that amount to 40,000. My reasoning for that is there are many people that make 40,000 right now or less. They're paying full real estate taxes if they're under 65. And so I'm just trying to make this so that those are really, really tight. They do not have to choose between their medicine and their taxes. The deferral issue addresses part of it. I'm just trying to tighten that up and adjust for inflation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion, anyone? All right, we're going to have to resolve your desire after we've resolved this issue before it can actually move beyond here. Are we ready? Is there any further discussion? Supervisor Trout.
Aye.
Supervisor Dunn.
Aye.
Supervisor Lofton.
Aye.
Supervisor Wells.
No.
Supervisor Slaughter.
No.
Supervisor McCarthy.
No.
Chair votes no, the motion fails.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, we have no planning commission business or other planning business. Board liaison reports, are there any?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Frederick Water report.
Yes.
So there was a resolution of delegation of the authority to execute final settlement, an agreement between Frederick Water and the town of Stevens City. And I've went ahead and forwarded all of you an email just now that has further information. Additionally, the Opequon water supply plan is moving forward. The design for the raw water pump station on the Opequon Creek is nearly finished. It's slated to be released for construction bids in March. Both components of the Opequon water supply plan should be under construction later this spring. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Any other liaison reports? Are there any? Thank you. Citizen comments. This is the portion of the meeting we set aside for citizen comments on any issue that you might like to raise to the board. Would anyone like to comment? Anyone? Last call. Seeing no one, we'll close the public comment portion. Board of Supervisors comments, are there any?
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor McCarthy.
I'd just like to express my appreciation to the Fire and Rescue Department for all the work that they did during the recent ice storm. It was a record number of calls for our county. From all reports, it was handled well, it was handled effectively, and I commend all the men and women who put their life on the line during that storm to help out their community. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Vice Chairman Lofton.
Mr. Chairman, I move adjourned.
To adjourn, is there a second?
Second.
Second, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye, we'll stand adjourned. I thank everyone for their time and attention.